Hans Oster was not a movie hero, but he was one of those men who decided to confront the monster from within. His story is not made of battles won or triumphant speeches. It is made of silence, faith, and a courage that knew it would not save him. He was a German officer who, at the height of Nazism, chose to defy Adolf Hitler from the heart of the German army. He did it without weapons, without his own army, and without hope of victory. And he paid for it with his life. He was born in Dresden in 1887. From a young age, he stood out for his discipline, his religiousness, and his sense of duty. He served in the First World War, where he learned the real cost of blind obedience. When the war ended, he remained in the reduced army that the Treaty of Versailles allowed Germany to keep, the Reichswehr. By then he was a respected, upright man with a promising career. But what set him apart from many of his comrades was something invisible, a conscience that did not know how to be silent. When Hitler came to power, many officers saw in him the promise of a German rebirth. Oster, at first, also believed that perhaps this leader could restore lost honor. But it only took a few years to discover the horror behind the rhetoric. Persecutions, concentration camps, murders, a state turned into a machine of hate. And it was then that the soldier became a conspirator. Hans Oster was not a politician. He did not seek fame or power. He was a man of faith, deeply Christian, who saw Nazism as a blasphemy. Starting in 1938, he began organizing resistance networks within the Wehrmacht. He tried to convince his comrades that Hitler had to be stopped before he destroyed Germany. Many listened to him. Few followed him. In those years, his opposition was as silent as it was constant. While the High Command celebrated the Führer's victories, Oster saw the disaster coming. During the Sudetenland crisis, when Hitler threatened to invade Czechoslovakia, he participated in plans for an internal coup. If the Führer ordered an open war, they planned to stop him by force. But the plan fell apart when Hitler achieved his objectives without firing a shot. The cowardice of the other military leaders buried the conspiracy. Even so, Hans Oster didn't give up. From his post in the Abwehr, the military intelligence service, he worked alongside Wilhelm Canaris, his superior and secret ally. Both leaked information to foreign diplomats, warning them of the regime's intentions. Oster even went so far as to warn the Netherlands of the imminent German invasion. He did so knowing that if he were discovered, there would be no trial or pardon. His vision of patriotism was different from the Nazi oath. For him, loving Germany meant saving it from self-destruction. He did not see betrayal in challenging the dictator, but in remaining silent in the face of his madness. He was aware that the price would be high, but he chose to act. By the early 1940s, the Gestapo already suspected him. His closeness to Canaris and his ambiguous stance towards the regime made him a target. However, for a time, his military rank protected him. Until the net of conspiracies began to tighten, Oster was one of the names indirectly linked to the July 20th, 1944, plot when Claus von Stauffenberg attempted to assassinate Hitler by placing a bomb in his headquarters. Although he did not participate directly in the attempt, he had been connected for years to the same resistance network. When the bomb failed, everything fell apart. The Gestapo unleashed a wave of mass arrests. Thousands of officers, politicians, and civilians were detained. Many were tortured to death. Oster was one of them. He was captured in April 1945, just weeks before the end of the war. The irony of his fate was cruel. After years of risking his life, he was arrested, just as the German defeat was inevitable. The regime he had fought for so long was crumbling, but it still had enough strength to kill. He was transferred to the Flossenbürg concentration camp, a place where humanity no longer existed. There he met other conspirators like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Wilhelm Canaris. They all awaited death. The days in Flossenburg were endless. The prisoners knew the end was near, but not their own. Oster had little left to lose. He spent the nights in silence, praying, aware that the punishment would be exemplary. On April 9th, 1945, just 3 weeks before the total collapse of the Third Reich, a summary trial was organized. It was a farce, a spectacle with no defense or witnesses. The sentence was already written: death by hanging. They say courage is measured when there is no hope left. And if you've made it this far, you probably believe that too. So don't forget to subscribe. But let's return to Flossenburg. The execution was carried out that same morning. Hans Oster, Canaris, Bonhoeffer, and others were led to the camp yard. They were forced to undress in front of the other prisoners, one more humiliation before the end. Witnesses recalled the silence that hung in the air. There were no screams or pleas, only the sound of the wind and boots hitting the ground. Oster walked upright, without words, but with a serenity that many did not understand. When his turn came, he climbed the scaffold calmly. He did not try to defend himself or make a speech. He briefly looked at the sky and bowed his head. Minutes later, the rope tightened. He died hanging in silence, without drama or heroism, but with his dignity intact. The brutality of that execution was described in the Nuremberg trials as one of the last crimes of the Nazi regime. The bodies were cremated and their remains thrown into mass graves, without name or trace. It was the regime's way of trying to erase the memory of those who had defied it. But they did not succeed. Just 2 weeks later, the Flossenburg camp was liberated by American troops. If Oster had survived 14 more days, he would have seen the fall of the monster he had fought for years. The irony is unbearable. The man who foresaw the disaster, who risked everything to stop it, died when victory was just around the corner. After the war, his name was slowly recovered. Not with the brilliance of great heroes, but with the silent respect that just men deserve. Today, streets and memorials in Germany bear his name. He is a symbol of moral resistance, of those who chose conscience over obedience. Hans Oster never sought recognition. His struggle was invisible, his sacrifice personal, his end inevitable. But his legacy is profound. He demonstrated that inside the monster, there were also those who tried to stop it, even knowing they would not succeed. His story reminds us that courage is not always seen, but it always leaves a mark. Sometimes, the most heroic acts occur in the darkness, far from applause, and are paid for with one's life. Oster left no speeches, no glorious farewell letters. He only left the example of someone who chose to do the right thing when everyone else was doing the easy thing. His execution was the last symbolic victory of a regime that was already dying. But it was also the first step towards Germany's moral redemption. Because in the midst of barbarism, there were still men like him, soldiers who disobeyed out of love for their country and respect for humanity. When the Allied troops found the remains of the camp, the horror was indescribable. Piles of bodies, empty faces, silence. But among those ruins, the sacrifice of men like Hans Oster began to make sense. They had not died in vain. Their example survived, and his name became a reminder of what it means to have a conscience when everyone else loses theirs. Oster never fired at his enemies. His battle was internal, spiritual, and solitary. He fought against the corruption of his own army, against the pressure of his superiors, and against the constant fear of being discovered. Every day he remained alive was a victory. Every piece of information leaked, a form of resistance. and every decision he made brought him a little closer to the end he already sensed. In a letter prior to his arrest, he had written, "What is to come will be terrible, but I prefer to die knowing I did not remain silent." That phrase sums up his entire life. He died without glory, but with honor. There were no medals or parades, only a body hanging silently in the yard of a concentration camp. But with time, history vindicated him, because in the midst of darkness, he chose to be a spark. Hans Oster did not save Germany, but he rescued his conscience. And that legacy, though invisible, is worth more than any military victory. Because in the end, his execution was not just that of a man, it was that of an idea. That even within hell, decency can exist. And you, do you think his sacrifice was worth it? I read you in the comments. If this story has impacted you, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and join us in our next video, where we will continue exploring the most brutal endings and the most surprising lives in history.